Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kernahan Webb. I'm a professor in the Law and Business Department at Toronto Metropolitan University. And more importantly, for this session here, I am the director of the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this particular session. We'll be talking to Jennifer and Jake about a fast-growing rule of law lawyers pledge initiative. And we'll be talking about that in the context of a larger exploration going on about the feasibility and value of there being a global coalition in support of the rule of law and the international rules-based order. So welcome to those of you who are here for the first time at one of these TMU CSR Institute sessions, and welcome back to those of you who are coming back for a return visit. We do have people from around the world patching in, and I'm very grateful knowing that some of you are patching in very early in the morning or very late in the evening from different parts of the world, and we're grateful for you to patch in addition to those who are patching in more locally here in, for example, North America, as the case might be. All of these sessions are conducted in the spirit of constructive engagement and with the idea of how can we optimally have an impact, business, government, private sector, legal profession, and so on and so forth. And this particular session is co-sponsored by two excellent student organizations here at Toronto Metropolitan University, and you see them mentioned there. Just gonna see if I can get to the next slide here. There we go. Toronto Metropolitan University is located in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. All TMU CSR Institute sessions are animated by this definition of social responsibility, which you can see puts emphasis on the responsibility of organizations for the impacts of their decisions and activities on society and the environment through transparent and ethical behavior, contributing to sustainable development, health and welfare of society, taking into account the expectations of stakeholders, not just shareholders, stakeholders, of which shareholders are just one example of a stakeholder. Communities are another, individuals are another, competitors are another, workers are another, the environment is another, and so on and so forth. Is in compliance with applicable law and consistent with international norms of behavior, and is integrated not only in the organization, but in its relationships with others. For example, in its relationships with communities, customers, workers, investors, governments, and so on. The other animating concept for all TMU CSR Institute events is this concept of sustainable governance, which starts from this proposition that the best likelihood of addressing the complex, fast-evolving, multi-jurisdictional, environmental, social, and economic challenges we face in the 21st century, and face it, we're going through some very significant challenges of that nature right now. It's going to involve harnessing the unique energies and capabilities of all three, of government, the private sector, and civil society. And that involves using a combination of rule instruments, of which law is an extremely important one, processes, institutions, and actors, sometimes operating collaboratively, and sometimes operating in more of a rivalrous check and balance fashion. And just to be clear, when we talk about institutions, instruments, processes, and actors, institutions includes everything from legislatures and courts, but also private entities, industry associations that create rules for their members, and faith-based organizations that have got their own institutions and so on. And in terms of rule instruments, yes, certainly law is critically important and central, but there's many, many other rules that exist in our society, standards and so on. And again, faith-based rules, and they're all playing an important role in the proper functioning of societies. In terms of processes, again, the obvious processes are the law-making processes, the law adjudication processes, the law implementation and enforcement processes, but there's also processes associated with the development of standards and the certification of standards and the auditing of standards, and all of those are also extremely important. And then in terms of actors, we've got a wide range of actors, both at the broad level of actors within particular, a university, as well as the university itself, actors within parliament, actors within bureaucracies, and so on and so forth. And all of those actors, whether they are in a civil society organization, an industry association, or at a law school, at a law prof, they're all interacting. And when they interact, that's all part of this broader governance ecosystem. So just to let you know that there are many TMU CSR Institute sessions. Right now, we're on a bit of a jag in terms of exploring this notion of a global coalition, multi-sectoral coalition on the rule of law, but we have sessions on many, many other topics: business and human rights, the environment, the use of disclosure approaches, and so on and so forth. So please stay tuned for those sessions by just going up to the CSR Institute website. TMU, not bragging, but TMU does have a very good reputation for its work in this space. And if you are not a subscriber, you can email me and I will get you subscribing to the email list that will tell you about upcoming events. Now, turning to our guest speakers here today, Jennifer and Jake. First about Jennifer. She's an assistant professor at the law school here at Toronto Metropolitan University and a part-time member of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. Prior to that, she was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto and a member of the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario and a litigator at Torys LLP. She does interdisciplinary research, very interesting in my opinion, looking at cultural institutions to support the dissemination of evolution of human rights norms at a cultural level. And so that's extremely interesting and clearly very relevant here. She conducts research with respect to the return of cultural artifacts to Indigenous communities. Her work is funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council here in Canada. She's written on a number of different topics and published in a number of different scholarly journals, and has held a number of different fellowships here, including a Jackman Humanities Institute-Mellon Fellowship. And Jake, also a man with a lot of very fascinating experience and background, also at the Lincoln Alexander School here at Toronto Metropolitan University. Done a lot of work in the area of human rights advocacy at different levels, as they say, multi-level, and a lot of work in the area of artificial intelligence. And again, looking at several different countries. And prior to this, he served as the chief counsel of Africa Canada AI and Data Innovation Consortium, which was involved in the mobilizing of AI and big data techniques to build governance strategies. And he's a project coordinator for a SSHRC partnership called Canada's Rights Role in Sub-Saharan Africa. And definitely, Jake, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts about the rule of law in Africa and possible support for a global rule of law coalition from an African perspective. So hopefully you'll be able to say a few words about that as well, taking advantage of you being here. And his work is basically involving an intersection of international law, human rights, and AI, published widely, a number of different journals. He's a Vanier Scholar, PhD candidate at Osgoode Hall Law School, and really focusing on examining the legitimization of AI and its impact and pursuit of realization of human rights in Africa. So in short, two very capable scholars who happen to be both directly involved in this rule of law lawyers pledge for Canadian firms, which we will be talking about momentarily. About myself, very, very briefly. So I teach here, as you can see, and I've done a lot of research and writing basically on the area of regulatory innovation. And that takes us into, for example, regulatory approaches that involve the non-state actors and involve beyond law, in addition to law and the implications for law. And I've been involved in the development of a lot of different laws because I used to be with the federal government and extra legal approaches of one sort or another, both here in Canada and internationally. So just a heads up that if you do have any questions or comments, please email me and I will be tracking my emails, and I'll do my best to fold in your comments wherever I can into the conversation that unfolds. So a roadmap of what's going to happen now. I'm going to give a very quick diagnostic of the situation, and then we'll be moving in ultimately to turning things over to Jennifer and Jake. So with respect to the diagnostic of the current situation, I like to use this airline cockpit metaphor, which is, it's like someone has come up from the body of the plane and now is in the cockpit. And instead of the pilots who are monitoring and ensuring that those various different dials and levers and so on are properly operated, we have somebody coming in and he's jerking the various different levers up and down, left and right. The passengers are flying around left and right, and he seems to actually enjoy jerking it around. He enjoys hearing the squeals and cries coming up from the back. And so that's the first metaphor that I would use to describe what's happening here. Is we have somebody who feels no compunction about jerking those levers of governance around and jerking people around, to be completely blunt. And he's essentially adopting a kind of a role of king, not just of the United States, but of the globe. And we see that in terms of him opining on what's going on in the Ukraine or anywhere else in the world, and what's going on in Germany, what's going on in Canada, 51st state, and so on. So acting as if he can rule by fiat rather than in a structured way through the rules that are established in the United States and the Constitution and so on. So which gets us to the idea of the rule of law and the international rules-based order, which I refer to as load-bearing beams upon which everybody, governments, businesses, individuals, civil society organizations, communities, all depend ultimately on the rule of law for their day-to-day functioning. It gives them certainty, and it gives them an appreciation for the possibility of due process and fairness in their interactions. So the basic proposition that is being explored in all of these sessions is the idea that a global multi-sectoral coalition in support of the rule of law and the international rules-based order would bring together currently very distributed actors who are well known in their particular area, but are not necessarily reaching across the aisle to others and connecting and realizing that they have something in common, and that is the need to protect the rule of law. And I bring up the example of South Africa and apartheid, where there was this broad-based coalition that brought together intergovernmental bodies, governments, the private sector, civil society, individuals, and they all assisted in pressuring the South African government to ultimately abandon apartheid. Of course, it was the actions directly in South Africa and the sacrifices made directly in South Africa, which was of central importance. But I don't want to dismiss the value of that surrounding circle coalition in support. And I'm looking at that to be kind of a similar thing needs to happen now with respect to the rule of law. And that would bring together both US-based rule of law supporters, legal and otherwise, and also those outside of the US, including Canada. So But just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that the rule of law coalition is going to be some sort of a panacea, but I think that it could be part of the contribution that would prevent further erosion and perhaps build up the rule of law again to what it was before. So we're going to talk about what is meant by coalition, rule of law, rules-based order, and a forward plan. And then I'll be turning things over to Jennifer and Jake to specifically talk about the rule of law lawyers pledge here in Canada. So we're in what I call a poly crisis. And that poly crisis, because it's not just a single crisis, it's now kind of building multiple crises. And it's happening both at the domestic and the global level. And we seem to be at a global inflection point, critical inflection point, in the sense of we could go down a very dark hole. But if we all man the barricades, I think there's a possibility that we can actually stem the tide and prevent things from going further. But it is going to take concerted action by all of us. It's ironic because it's the United States which led the development of the rule of law and the international rules-based order. So it's ironic that they are the ones leading now basically the erosion of that and the domino effects it's having on all other countries. The institutional checks and balances that we are relying on, including lawyers, the courts, but also broader than that, in the United States, Congress, the Senate, and so on, are basically, they're buckling under the pressure. Whether or not they can withstand this type of pressure remains to be seen. And basically, the Trump administration is adopting this flood the zone strategy where everything all at once in the hopes of, I think, overwhelming individuals and people. And so we have to be alerted to that. So the belief that underlies everything that's going on now here through the TMU CSR Institute is that coordinated action by concerned actors at both the domestic and the global level stands the best chance of preserving the integrity of the rule of law and the international rules-based order. And this is just a quote from one civil society organization that we've identified has come forward with a statement in support of the rule of law. And what they said was, we do not agree on all matters, and in fact, at times have been or are adverse to each other in court or other professional settings. But despite our differences, we all share our commitment to the United States Constitution. This is an American-based organization, and explicitly the rule of law. And I think that idea of we need to stretch across the aisles, not just stay in our silos. We need to stretch across the aisles in order to be effective with this type of threat. So a coalition is a structured or semi-structured alliance. The idea is that it has a common purpose. It's voluntary. There's diverse membership, but there is coordination. And it's as a result of that coordination that it can be more effective than just having distributed actors around the world. But each of the individual members of the coalition retains their own autonomy. The preliminary research that we've done, which is available on the Resilient Governance website, which I see I've put up here, has found more than 6,000 different organizations around the world that are expressing their support for the rule of law and variously condemning erosions from the rule of law. And I encourage you to check the resilientgovernance.org website for that research. And by all means, email me to add in your 2 cents worth in that regard. But we can see that there's both a lot of action in the United States and a lot of action beyond the United States, a lot of action of law-based entities of one sort or another, but also increasing amounts of actions from non-law-based entities, business associations, for example, such as in the United States, something called the Business for Social Responsibility has come out strongly in support of the rule of law and against erosions from the rule of law. So I'm going to leave it to Jennifer and Jake to expand on how they are defining rule of law, but it's basically this idea of accountability, of the need to ensure that the key institutions and organs in society their integrity is protected, both in rulemaking and rule implementation and rule adjudication, and that we have equality in enforcement, and also at the international level, that we have got respect for sovereignty of nations and sovereignty of individuals, and therefore support for human rights everywhere, for example. And international rules-based order, as you can see here, it's this idea that there are agreed upon norms and rules and institutions, and they are necessary for global stability, cooperation, and peace. And there are many that are from the UN, United Nations, but also from many other important intergovernmental bodies of one sort or another, such as the OECD. But you can see there an alphabet soup of other very important intergovernmental organizations, institutions, and processes that are doing important work in this area. So our forward plan is to develop an inventory of all the organizations that are expressing commitment, to develop a draft common statement on support for the rule of law and the international rules-based order that can be used by any organization around the world. They do not have to follow it, but just to provide guidance. We'll be hearing more about the rule of law pledge and how they are defining and their particular statement of the rule of law. Taking the temperature, basically we're taking the temperature through this session and others concerning the appetite for a more coordinated approach that would bring together lawyers in Canada and elsewhere in the world, but also a broad range of other actors, Transparency International, Amnesty International, all those sorts of civil society organizations, intergovernmental bodies, governments, and so on, to create a broad coalition, a multi-sectoral coalition. And then from there, we can identify possible actions that the coalition could undertake. So that's what I wanted to say by way of introduction for the ongoing group of sessions exploring the value of a international multi-sectoral rules-based coalition. And what I'd like to do now is pass things over to my colleagues, Jennifer and Jake, to tell us a little bit about the origins, evolutions, challenges, and so on so far with respect to their work, which is gaining a lot of steam to develop and implement a rule of law pledge for lawyers here in Canada. So over to you, and very grateful to you, Jennifer and Jake, for coming on and saying a few words about your work.
Thank you so much, Kernahan. Thanks to you and your team for inviting Jake and I today, and also for really modeling how to create an interdisciplinary conversation between academia and civil society and government. It's so important, and I'm so impressed by your work. I really appreciated that introduction. I really like the metaphor of the rule of law as the load-bearing beams of our society. So thank you for that. Jake, do you want to say a few words before I dive into our PowerPoint?
I just wanted to say I like the metaphor of the aeroplane and the cockpit. I think it is important to recognize the rule of law as a shared agreement of understanding, that there's the pilot's role, there's the flight attendant's role. Even as passengers, sometimes when you sit at the exit, you do have a responsibility and a role to play. So I really love that. And thank you so much, Ken, again, for having us.
So we thought we'd start today by just sharing a simple PowerPoint that explains what the Rule of Law project is and how we developed the Lawyer's Pledge. And at the outset, I just want to say that all the views I express today are my own. So I will share my screen and we'll dive into this pledge. So I hope you can all see that. So we started the Rule of Law project a couple months ago. So it's really at its early stages. And I thought I would start by just answering some simple questions. So what is the Rule of Law project? Basically, it's an initiative of a group of Canadian lawyers and academics to reinforce our professional commitment to the rule of law in Canada. We wanted to start simply, and so that is basically it. A lot of people have asked us how
We were fearing that there might be this problem with Jennifer's.
are committed to
There we
public
go.
education, uh, as well as the important role that the rule of law plays in our democracy, and to encourage lawyers and others to stand up for the rule of law so that it doesn't get eroded over time. And really, one of my colleagues has mentioned that this project brings the rule of law to the front of our consciousness as lawyers. It's always there in the background, but at this point in time, we needed to really bring it up front and recommit to it. And the reason, as Kernahan has eloquently stated, is really we've all seen how quickly things can change. And we're very proud of our system in Canada. We have excellent and we need to protect our system so that it doesn't get eroded over time. So what are the project's goals? The Rule of Law project is dedicated to creating a community of lawyers that will work together to support the rule of law. And we welcome lawyers from all areas of practice, and we will strive to educate Canadians on the importance of the rule of law. And we're asking lawyers to rule of law through a simple rule of law pledge. And I wanted to talk about the pledge for a moment and give you some background. We see it in a way as a renewal of our vows. So when we become lawyers, we the rule of law in our barrister and solicitor's oaths. So this is nothing new for lawyers. Every lawyer in Canada form has committed to support the administration of justice and the rule of law.
Jennifer, I'm sorry to interrupt here, but we're just getting a little bit of a glitch from your
I'm sorry.
communication. A suggestion has come in that maybe if you turn off your video, which is really a shame because it's part of your communication, we can turn off your video. That might strengthen your signal. But keep the audio, but just turn off your video.
Happy
It's
to
worth
do
a
that.
try. It's worth a try.
There
Thanks,
we go.
Jennifer.
Thank you for that. So as I was saying, the pledge of our vows as barristers and solicitors, and many of us, when they become a lawyer, they take an oath to support the administration of justice and the rule of law. But we take this oath once, generally, and so it's a reminder for lawyers across Canada of the oath that they took, and again, to raise the consciousness of the rule of law. Sorry. Here. So the oath in Ontario really clearly states that we must be champions of the rule of law. And it's so significant that I included a longer portion of the oath here. It reads, "I shall protect and defend the rights and interests of such persons as may employ me. I shall conduct all faithfully and to the best of my ability. I shall neglect no one's interest and shall faithfully serve and diligently represent the best interests of my client. I shall not refuse causes of complaint reasonably founded, nor shall I promote suits upon frivolous pretenses." It then goes on to say, "I shall not pervert the law to favor or prejudice anyone, but in all things I shall conduct myself honestly and with integrity and civility. I shall seek to ensure access to legal services. I shall seek to improve the administration of justice. I shall champion law and safeguard the rights and of all persons. I shall strictly observe and uphold the ethical standards that govern my profession." And on our website, we've actually lists the barrister and solicitor's oaths across the provinces and territories of Ontario. And they are different in their language, but they all contain some reference to administration of justice and the rule of law. And so we base the language of the rule of law pledge on the oaths that we've already. So there are three parts to the pledge. The first is with regards to the protection of the judicial system. In states, we affirm our obligation to encourage respect for the administration of justice and protecting the Canadian judicial system and all of its participants from undue interference of any kind. The second refers to access to just legal work supporting the rule of law, and states we will seek to ensure access to justice for litigants where the rule of law in Canada is at stake, including through pro bono work where necessary. And finally, we're really creating a coalition. So we commit to supporting members of this Canadian lawyers work to uphold the principles in this document. If any coalition member becomes subject to undue harm or interference by any arm of any Canadian government as a result of its efforts to uphold the above principles, we all commit to supporting that efforts. We kept the pledge form very simple. And Jake will speak to a bit more to how we designed the website and thought about building the coalition. It's clear that the pledge will be made public and people can receive further updates or not, and they just take this. Couple last thoughts. Our group has really discussed the fact that the rule of law, like democracy itself, is more than a concept. It's not just an ideal. Its very existence depends on the purposeful actions of governments alike. The rule of law and democracy both require action. And I think to reference Kernahan's metaphor, it's one thing to have load-bearing beams, but you have to make sure that those beams stay in good shape over time so that they can support the rest of the architecture that our society relies on. We have gotten press on this pledge through Canadian Lawyer magazine, but so far this is the only form of media we have really attracted, but it's a great start. I encourage you to. And what's next? So it's really early days for the project. We've set a primary goal of getting over 1,000 lawyer pledges, and right now we're over 600. We talk a lot about the importance of public education on the rule of law, and so we're interested in getting more active. The role of lawyers in providing public education. And here is the website address and what it looks like, where you can take the pledge, and you can see just over the last 2 days, the number has increased. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, see if my video works for a bit. But I thought after this brief introduction, over to Jake to add some of his thoughts about the project.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I need to actually start by saying I am not a Canadian lawyer. I'm an international lawyer, but I always like to think of the rule of law around something Kofi Annan said in 2005. He said, every nation that proclaims the rule of law in their country must also respect it abroad. And every nation that insists on that mission abroad must also enforce it at home. Because the truth is, a threat to the rule of law anywhere is a threat to the rule of law here as well. In fact, if you told me as a first or second year law student, when I was taught many years ago about the rule of law, if you told me that this is something that we would need to protect or advocate for, I would be like, it's laughable, right? I mean, just like Professor Webb mentioned, using the same metaphor of the aeroplane, if you told me like, okay, the cockpit is for the pilot, the passenger seats are for the passenger, I'm like, duh, isn't it obvious? But we're in such a critical time where I think it's important to restate the value of the rule of law. And when we developed this website, the feedback has been quite positive. In fact, it is dedicated to lawyers to reaffirm our pledge to the rule of law. But it's interesting how a lot of lawyers did not contextualize the gamut of what that pledge means, what it stands for, just like Jennifer pointed out. What does the rule of law mean? What are like protection of our judicial system, your commitment to support the rule of law. An attack on one person, on one institution is an attack on everyone. So if you keep toggling with the like pilots, whatever it is they use in the cockpit, or you keep messing around with the flight attendants trolley, like you're disrupting the entire service and the entire safety and success of that flight. So Jennifer is a senior colleague and mentor of mine, and she was like, Jake, come on board, let's do this project. And together with a couple of really amazing lawyers, Sandra Barton, Shayla Block, Gerald Chan, Jennifer herself, Lindsay Scott, I think one or two other people, we had meetings and said, look, we need to come up with something where we can educate lawyers about the rule of law, but also get lawyers to recommit, like Jennifer said, retake their vows to this very important principle. And actually, it's been quite a great experience. I think we've even surpassed 575, as Jennifer pointed out, which were about 626 pledges at the moment. But also, it's great to see the caliber of Canadian lawyers who are pledging from all around the world, from all provinces represented. And it took us some time to gather all the bylaws and oaths of all the law societies across various provinces and territories in Canada. But this is also similar to what is available across the world. So like Professor Webb mentioned, if you take South Africa, for example, there was a broad-based coalition that made the apartheid regime to be dismantled. We saw how lawyers, the African National Congress, we saw how trade unions like COSATU, we saw how faith-based institutions mobilized against this concept of the rule of law. Yes, the law could be hegemonic sometimes, could have some power differentials, but it's the same rule of law that can be applied to emphasize constitutional democracy and legitimacy, which is what this is. And for me, I think one of the greatest joys is, historically speaking, Canada has played a pivotal role at the international scene on advancing rule of law and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If you go back to John Humphrey, who was a prominent Canadian lawyer and scholar, he authored the first draft of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the most advanced legal document in the world today. It's part of the Bill of Rights. So we do not undermine the value of a small project like this. I don't even think it's small. We also don't undermine the need to reemphasize these values that we thought were common sense, that, hey, people should elect their government and not the other way around. Businesses should not be determining money should not determine who rules or who serves us in our political positions. The law applies to everybody, irrespective of who you are, how big or small, how privileged or otherwise. The law applies to each and every one, and that elected government officials are responsible for making laws, and the laws that are made must be followed. So government, citizens, judges, media, they all have a role to play in enforcing and respecting the rule of law. So yeah, it's I think, again, if you look at the website, it's all, part of the activism is me staying up and Jennifer staying up, designing what should the website look like. So we actually coded it from scratch. Jennifer bought the domain name. I was like, what color should we use? Jennifer had to go through her phone. She's like, I have this picture of an artist called John Greer. I think it was taken by Jennifer Atkins, and she sent it to me, and we're coding the data. I think Gerald got some people to find all the oaths from law societies, and we'll put it together. So it's not we're not specialists. We're not like big hands and authorities when it comes to the rule of law. We're concerned lawyers who feel a need to intervene and not stand by. And we're happy to see this project take shape, and we're happy to see the pledges. And we look forward to a much more committed approach to this with many more communities beyond lawyers as well.
That's great, Jake and Jennifer. Really appreciate your succinct presentation of a very clearly a very appropriate initiative at this particular time. I was struck by, among other things, I was struck by this idea that we took for granted. Legally trained people took for granted that part of the pledge, and around the world, we take for granted the rule of law. And what we're seeing now is, oh, let's zero in on that particular part of the pledge. And I think what's necessary is that same sort of approach needs to be not only the lawyers, but also the law professors, but then beyond the law professors, the universities, right? Because the universities as a whole, as we see now in the United States, not only are lawyers being threatened, not only are law firms being threatened, but entire universities are being threatened. And obviously, prior to that, and on an ongoing basis, individuals are being threatened, courts are being threatened. So I think we're at this stage now where we're recognizing this thing that we took for granted, the rule of law, we no longer can take for granted, which could be an opportunity. And that opportunity would be an opportunity for us to revisit what do we mean by the rule of law, and how can we properly bolster and support the rule of law so it is not a lone plank, a lone beam that is kind of left on its own to support an entire society. That's not going to work. That's just not going to work. And if you think of since we're using the load-bearing beam metaphor for the moment, that's part of a house. A house is made by, yes, it's made by the cement mason people who created the basement and then put in that beam. But there's also the plumbers and the carpenters and the electricians. And it takes all of those parties together to build a house, albeit all based upon that load-bearing beam. So I'm very interested in seeing how we can expand a rule of law pledge specifically for lawyers, because lawyers are networks of people into society. They're interacting with everybody, all of their clients, and all of their colleagues. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about how we can take a rule of law pledge and make that into a much broader support for the rule of law. Broader here in Canada, and Jake specifically, given that your connections back to Africa, I'm interested to see how can we talk about getting sort of profile for the idea of a global rule of law coalition in Africa. Now, obviously, you cannot be the spokesperson for all of Africa. Much as I'd like to heap that heavy responsibility on your shoulders, I'm not going to. But you can speak, given your intensive work, specifically in the AI area and governance and so on there, but you can speak to the possibilities. How can we take this concept of a global rule of law coalition that brings together both legally trained people and legal professions related to it, like law professors, and make that into something much broader? Why could we not see, for example, the universities of the world unite around the concept of the rule of law? Surely it's the basis for everything they teach. Even in the natural sciences, does it not depend ultimately on the rule of law? So how do we, and that's just one example of a sort of a strand of this web or network around the world. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. I'm interested to hear, Jennifer, your thoughts also with respect to, in Canada, what are the next possible steps of your initiative specifically? And I know we talked about this a little bit offline in advance of this, but I kind of said, well, where are you going next? Are you going to the professors? What about the entire university and so on? So building that momentum into something bigger than just the law profession. As I think that is where the concentration is at the moment. So I'll turn those two questions over to you now, both for comment, and then we'll circle back.
Jake, do you want to start?
You can go ahead.
Okay.
If
I apologize for my internet. If it's glitchy, just put your hand up and I'll turn my camera off again. So I think these are really important points, and I'm really concerned that we have lost the thread a bit on education, the importance of the rule of law, and that there is a distrust of law and of lawyers and of judges, and that we need to do some work to talk about the importance of checks and balances in our society, and how law it's not always effective, and it doesn't always lead to just outcomes, but the provides us with nonviolent means to justice and to challenge interpretation that marginalize or oppress. And that without the rule of law, we don't have the ability to check government action, right? We lose the ability to check the action of people in power. And it's very important that we have processes that allow us to continue to improve our society. In terms of expanding the project, we need to get all as many lawyers in Canada as we can on board, and extend that to our law schools and law students. We also think about the movement of paralegals, so everyone involved in the legal system recognizes their commitment to the rule of law. And I'm really interested, so Kearney, this will not be a surprise to you, in law's relationship with culture, and how an understanding of the rule of law should be part of our way we think about the world, the way we process our relationships. We see the unpredictability of the rights right now. So businesses need the rule of law. Students need to know what's happening. So to work on education that explains why this notion of checks and balances and the rule of law in our system helps us all reach our goals in society. So I think a lot about that, and I think we have a lot of work to do as legal academics in that space.
Excellent. I know I'm pushing things, but it's one thing to have law professors fully understanding of the significance of the rule of law, and I quite agree that the education that is provided by law professors can point this out and emphasize the significance of the rule of law as an underlying, whether you're teaching family law or intellectual property law or any law at all, how it all ultimately depends on the rule of law and the institutions of law for that. But I'm also really interested in hearing your thoughts about how we can move this beyond the legal community. And I'm seeing that this particular initiative, the Rule of Law Pledge, which has its home in, first of all, lawyers, practicing lawyers, but also law professors, how we can move that to law schools across Canada, uniting around their support for the rule of law, and then from there, universities are across Canada supporting the rule of law. And then, and this gets over to you, Jake, why stop there? Why stop with Canada? Why couldn't all of the law professors, why couldn't all of the law faculties, why couldn't all of the universities around the world link hands and say, everything we do is dependent ultimately on the rule of law? And so I'm very interested to hear your thoughts about how do we move this ahead? This is a time where I'm sorry to say, but our backs are against the wall here. And everything that is in place, however imperfect, I should add, however imperfect the UN is, however imperfect the international rules-based order is, however imperfect the rule of law is, and it is very imperfect. And we spent most of our days prior to this whole threat coming up, pointing out all the limitations and weaknesses of all of these things. But now we need to come together, right? And we need to move, I think, and band together and realize, yes, in spite of our differences, we actually all need to come together on this. So your thoughts on that?
I'm just going to add a few words before we so yes, I think this is all critically important, and I'm really pleased by the breadth of the legal practices that are signing on the pledge, and I see in-house counsel, different corporations signing too, and that will impact those corporations, right? It's really important to get all the different practice areas in Canada and different types of legal practice. We have government lawyers signing, as well as sole practitioners. So one of the reasons I think our project is working, and Jake brought this up to me too, is that it's a grassroots movement. It's a group of lawyers who took the initiative to do this. And one thing that we can do is model how to create a coalition that respects the rule of law and you know, again, raises the consciousness and the action to support it. I think to have it be effective at law schools, it should come from the students, right? Students acknowledge the importance of the rule of law, and the same thing at universities. We need leaders for sure, but the swell has to come from the people on the ground in order for it to really take in those cultural norms sort of way. Jake, what do you think?
I completely agree. I mean, first of all, Kernigan, I love your anecdotes and metaphors. I need to learn like the house, the beam, the plane. That's really interesting. And again, talking about the house, I know, yes, as academics, we have a role to play to society, but like Professor Jennifer has a research she has to do. She has classes to teach. She has like a lot of commitment. And then we have to meet every week and have a phone call and design a website and research the rule of law pledges and reach out to our friends to sign on. Yes, it's great. And I think that's part of our role as academics, but also like we need to ensure that one person is not the plumber and the electrician and the, you know, like it's great that we can see the momentum and we can make impact in this way. But I think it talks to how critical a moment this is and how fast and easy for such a fundamental principle to quickly erode just before our eyes. And in my research, which focuses a lot on like artificial intelligence and the impact on the legal system, we're in an era where, you know, deep fakes can fabricate evidence, AI can automate mass surveillance, disinformation campaigns can like destabilize entire legal systems within hours. So I like what you say, Professor Webb, about a global rule of law coalition, which I think is essential to the immune system, the global immune system against any form of digital authoritarianism, because right now, you know, people don't have to be in a physical space to erode or have an impact on our rule of law. So yes, and again, we don't want to be like, oh, we are the builders and plumbers and electricians and carpenters. We're doing what we can in our own profession, in our own country. And I think if everyone can do the same in their own spheres of influence, if our students come on board and paralegals come on board and clerks and, you know, everyone begins to come on board, that's the kind of fortitude we need to see as we've seen in other places. Because the truth is, it's happening everywhere and it's happening right before our eyes. I'm happy to see some of these lawyers stepping and do it. Of course, we know that not many lawyers care about this. Some people are like, well, I'm successful, I've done my bit, or I can't change the world. And we want to push back that it's possible to actually change and we can start small and build up. We see what's happening in the US. In the EU, we see what's happening in Hungary and Poland. In fact, the European Parliament has declared that Hungary can no longer be considered a full democracy because of its electoral autocracy, so to speak. We've seen the same thing in India. We've seen the same thing in El Salvador. And now it's coming to countries that we thought were more advanced when it comes to democracy. So if I compare to Africa, like we normally say in my culture, if gold rust, what would iron do? If the rule of law can be easily eroded in countries like Canada or the US, what do you expect other like growing democracies to sort of do, and what kind of model are we sending out? So if we can show that, hey, as lawyers, we are reaffirming our pledge, and beyond just signing up to a website, these are the things we're doing in our communities to enforce and stand by the rule of law, I think that can inspire other communities in other countries, in other jurisdictions to sort of do the same. Of course, I'm hoping for maybe there would be some global coalition of legal guardians where lawyers, judges, civil society leaders, standing shoulder to shoulder from Toronto to Lagos to Cape Town to Nairobi. There will be a network of rule of law defenders, people who are like, yes, we're mobilized to take our pledge. And the truth is, every country that has a bar, there is some form of pledge that we sign on to, just like medical practitioners. So we're not coming up with anything new. We're saying we must remind ourselves why the law exists, why we exist as academics, why we exist as lawyers. And I think I'm very positive that this can be something instrumental to inspire other people. But I'm also wary of not filling our baskets with way much more than we can do. I'm just happy to see where this is going, and I'm happy to see the momentum that is building so far.
Well, thank you, Jake and Jennifer, for doing your part, as you say. And I think that's the beauty of a coalition, is that it doesn't mean that any one actor has to do everything, but actually everybody chipping in. Perhaps you've heard of the stone soup idea, that everybody contributes, and ultimately you have a soup as a result of that. I'm just going to mention we had a couple of excellent comments from people patching in. One saying that there is irony in seeing that in the face of rule of law trampling in the U.S., governments in Canada also start to weaken the rule of law, and pointing to Bill 5 and the special economic zones as potentially an example of that. And another comment. Let me just get it to it here. Given these political dramas, it seems clear that many governments are attempting to erode the Constitution and treaties. Are treaties one source of legitimate governance? Why can we not assert this loud and clear? And again, pointing to Bill C-5. So there's and other examples. So we've got issues here in Canada where we need to make sure that things are shored up here in Canada. But I think we also need to reach across outside of our legal domains and also outside of our country to make connections elsewhere. And I hope this conversation can be the start of exactly that. So unless you guys have got a last final word to mention at this point, I can think of many, but I'm going to suggest that we, for today, say congratulations to each of us for getting the word out, but also giving all of us a bit of a kick in the butt. There's so much more that we can do, and there's so much more everyone else needs to do if we're going to rise to this threat. So with that,
we're really great.
Thank you very much. Oh, Jennifer, you brought up a really important point. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada just yesterday indicated his concern with respect to the threat to the rule of law everywhere, in Canada and everywhere. So I commend you to just search Chief Justice Canada rule of law, and that will take you to a CBC article on that and many others. But thank you, Jennifer, for pointing that out. That's hot off the press, just as of yesterday. So again, thank you and congratulations to both of you for your work with the initiative. Wishing you continued success. Let's, the three of us, work together on some next steps, both within and beyond the legal community. Thanks. All the best.